This is Kreskin, and I don't have to point out that it's the Amazing Kreskin, and I'm really reflecting on what's on my mind. This is going to be a very singularly special moment, briefer than perhaps my future appearances with this series that I'm so excited about. But I think we have to stop and reflect on what's going on because we're going through a change now with this coronavirus pandemic, and hopefully it's slowing down. Some of our medical people have been very supportive and given us hope and said it could take another year or 2 years, but I don't quite believe them. However, I'm not sure what I believe anymore because our news coverage is quite unusual. Some of the stations are covering the news 32 hours a day. It's remarkable they're able to fill 32 hours with the news of this scenario. You see, this is what I want to share with you. I've been involved in 2 world wars. As a little kid, in the mid-1940s, we had a world war involving as the enemy military factions of Germany, Italy, and Japan. As a matter of fact, if it weren't for the brilliant move of Harry S. Truman, my uncles, who fought for a number of years in the war, would have been in another land, and the speculation was that had the war continued, we would have lost thousands and thousands of servicemen in just attacking and getting into Japan. But Truman dropped 2 bombs, and within a very short time, the military realized of our enemy, hey, we're not going to survive. Let's end things right here and now. The Second World War I've been involved in is the current World War. Well, when I was a kid and we had to go under the desk in grade school and what have you for practicing of air raids, the concern was of bombs. Today, it's the coronavirus pandemic. It's an invisible missile which can come in any part of the world under so many conditions. We, by the way, are having tremendous news coverage. As I said, when I was a kid, we saw the newsreels on the weekends or heard a little bit on the radio or saw it in the newspapers. But today it's massive, reaching almost a saturation point where we can hear the news, if we're foolish enough, every hour and every minute of the day. In the past, the only way we got the news is because some courageous newsmen traveled in the military during some of the heaviest fighting. One of the most famous was Ernie Pyle, bless his soul. And while we're sequestered in our room or a house and not able to leave it and so forth, many of our servicemen had as their boundaries a wall around them of earth and concrete and rocks, because they were in holes in the ground that were called foxholes, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, waiting to confront the enemy. So we have heroes, and forgive me if I misquoted that, but I want you to know this is really being spontaneous. Look at the heroes today. There are teachers, there are police, there are ambulance doctors, nurses, some of which are putting 18 hours a day in. And they really should never, never be forgotten. Understand one thing, that the safest place to be, no question about it, with all that we've learned about wearing masks and what have you, the safest possible place you can be today is outdoors. And talk to a scientist, not just a medical man. That is the safest place we can be to confront or be protected from this coronavirus pandemic. Now I want to tell you something. And this is why let's do us all a favor. When you see a policeman, a truck driver, an ambulance driver, a person delivering food and what have you, stop for a moment You can't touch them. One of our major methods of communication is a sense of touch, and that, of course, has been removed for the time being. But look at them. It only takes one sentence or two, and thank them for what they're doing, because they are genuine heroes. And that remark may stick more to them than when they hear that on television 20,000 or 1,000,000 people sent in thank you notes. Don't forget that touch, even though it's verbal and visual, will mean more than most anything that you can do. As far as a kid, well, my uncles were in the army, and they would have gone into Japan with major dangers as how much longer their life would be. When they came back from the war, and I can say the same thing of my brother, who was in the Marines not too many years ago in another war, and I can say the same thing with scores and scores, hundreds of housewives I talked to early in my life, whose husbands were in the Second World War. Without exception, every single one of them said, and I can say this about my uncles, they never, never, never talked about or discussed the war. In the hundreds of hours I spent with my uncle, all of them as they came back from overseas, they never brought up the war. And my brother, the same is true. Well, maybe you need to touch the heroes in some way. After all, whether it's the Second World War or the Third World War, war is hell. I'll see you next week. May the good Lord willing.